The iron was still glowing red when Natalie heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching the smithy, and she knew before looking up that her entire life was about to change forever. She had been working in the forge since dawn, her leather apron covered in soot and her dark hair tied back with a strip of cloth, hammering away at a set of hinges that old Mr. Henderson had ordered for his barn door. The work was honest and hard, and at 21 years old, Natalie had spent the last 6 years learning everything she could about metalwork from the aging blacksmith, who had taken her in after her parents died of cholera. Las Vegas, New Mexico Territory, in the summer of 1878 was a rough town, full of cattle drives and railroad workers, gamblers and honest folk just trying to make their way. A woman working in a forge was unusual enough to raise eyebrows, but most folks had gotten used to seeing Natalie swinging a hammer alongside her mentor. The rider who dismounted outside was tall and lean, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of weathered denim. He removed his dusty hat as he stepped into the dim interior of the smithy, revealing dark blonde hair that curled slightly at his collar. Natalie straightened from the anvil, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of ash across her skin. "Help you?" she called out, her voice hoarse from breathing the forge air all morning. The man's gaze traveled around the workshop, taking in the organized chaos of tools and metal stock, the bellows huffing steadily, the cherry glow of the forge itself. When his eyes finally settled on her, something shifted in his expression, a subtle softening that made her heart skip unexpectedly. "Looking for the blacksmith," he said, his voice a low drawl that spoke of long days on the trail. "You are looking at her," Natalie replied, setting down her hammer and crossing her arms. "Well, the apprentice anyway. Master Hendricks is laid up with a bad leg. I am handling most of the work these days. What do you need?" The cowboy studied her for a long moment, and she felt a flush creep up her neck that had nothing to do with the heat of the forge. Finally, he stepped forward and extended his hand. "Name is Kieran Thornton. I run cattle about 15 miles west of here. Got a broken wagon wheel rim that needs mending, and my horse threw a shoe about 2 miles back." Natalie took his hand, feeling the calluses that matched her own, the firm grip that spoke of strength tempered with control. "Natalie Nichols, bring your horse around and I will get him shod first. The rim will take longer." Kieran nodded and went back outside, returning moments later leading a beautiful sorrel gelding with 4 white socks and an intelligent eye. Natalie approached the horse slowly, speaking in low tones, letting him get her scent before she ran her hands down his legs. The missing shoe was on the left front, and the hoof looked good, no cracks or damage from the lost iron. "You take good care of him," she observed, straightening up. "He takes good care of me," Kieran replied. "Seems only fair." There was something in the way he said it, a gentleness that contrasted with the gun belt slung low on his hips and the hard, worn look of his clothing. Natalie found herself wanting to know more about this quiet-spoken cowboy, which was foolish. Men passed through Las Vegas all the time. She had learned long ago not to let her head be turned by a handsome face and kind eyes. She set to work measuring the hoof and selecting an appropriate shoe from her stock. Kieran watched in silence as she heated the iron and shaped it with practiced strokes of her hammer, the ring of metal on metal filling the air with its familiar music. When she plunged the hot shoe into the water bucket, steam hissed and billowed around them. "You are good at that," Kieran said quietly. 6 years of practice," Natalie replied, testing the shoe against the hoof to check the fit. It was perfect. She positioned it carefully and began driving the nails, her movements efficient and sure. "My pa was a schoolteacher, believe it or not. Wanted me to follow in his footsteps." But after he and Ma passed, old Benjamin Hendricks offered me work here, and I found I had a talent for it. Sorry about your folks, Kieran said, and the sympathy in his voice sounded genuine. It was 6 years ago, Natalie said, though the words still brought a familiar ache. The cholera epidemic took a lot of people that summer. She finished with the hoof and straightened, patting the gelding's shoulder. That should hold him fine. Now let us see that wheel rim. Kieran led her outside to where his wagon sat in the dusty street. The rim had indeed broken, a clean crack that would need welding. Natalie examined it critically, running her fingers along the split. I can fix this, but it will take a few hours, she said. The metal needs to be heated just right, and then I will need to weld it and let it cool slowly so it does not crack again. I have got time, Kieran said. Is there somewhere I can get a meal while I wait? The Plaza Hotel has decent food, Natalie said, pointing down the street. Tell Maria that I sent you and she will treat you right. But Kieran did not move. He stood there in the morning sun, looking at her with those steady blue eyes, and finally he said, "Would you join me? When you take your break for lunch, I would be pleased to buy you a meal." The invitation caught Natalie off guard. She opened her mouth to refuse automatically, the way she had refused similar offers from other men over the years. But something made her hesitate. Maybe it was the genuine warmth in his expression, or the way he had not looked at her with surprise or disdain when he learned she was the blacksmith. Maybe it was simply that she was tired of always being alone, of keeping herself apart because it was safer that way. "All right," she heard herself say. "I will have this rim ready by noon. Meet me here then." A smile spread across Kieran's face, transforming it from merely handsome to something that made Natalie's breath catch. "I will be here," he promised. He helped her remove the broken rim from the wheel, his hands sure and capable, and then he headed off down the street toward the hotel. Natalie carried the heavy iron back into the forge, her mind whirling with thoughts she had no business entertaining. She had work to do, and letting herself be distracted by a cowboy who would probably ride out of town and never look back was foolishness of the highest order. But as she heated the broken rim in the forge, watching the metal glow from red to orange to yellow, she could not stop thinking about the way Kieran had looked at her. Not like she was a curiosity or an oddity, but like she was someone worth seeing. The welding required all her concentration. She positioned the broken edges together on the anvil, heating them until they were almost white-hot, then hammering them together with careful, precise strikes. The metal fused slowly, molecules bonding under heat and pressure, becoming whole again. She worked the weld carefully, smoothing it, strengthening it, making sure it would hold under the stress of travel on rough roads. By the time she finished, sweat was running down her back and her arms ached from the sustained effort. But the weld was perfect, barely visible, as strong as the original metal. She set the rim aside to cool slowly, banking the coals in the forge, and went to the pump in the yard to wash the soot from her face and hands. Kieran was waiting when she emerged, leaning against the fence post with his hat tilted back. He straightened when he saw her, and Natalie felt suddenly self-conscious about her rough work clothes and the fact that she probably still smelled of smoke and metal despite her quick wash. "Ready?" he asked, falling into step beside her as they walked toward the hotel. "As I will ever be," Natalie replied. "Fair warning, I am not used to fancy dining. I usually eat standing up in the forge." "Nothing fancy about the plaza," Kieran assured her. "Just good honest food." The hotel dining room was half full with the lunch crowd, cowboys and merchants and a few families passing through on the railroad. Maria, the proprietor's wife, greeted them with a warm smile and led them to a table by the window. The menu was simple: stew or roast beef with potatoes and vegetables, and they both ordered the stew along with coffee. "So tell me about cattle ranching," Natalie said when they were settled. "I have lived in Las Vegas for 6 years, and I still do not know much about it beyond what passes through town." Kieran leaned back in his chair, cradling his coffee cup in both hands. "Not much to tell, really. I have got a small spread, about 500 head. It is hard work, long hours, and you are always at the mercy of the weather and the market. But there is something about it that gets into your blood. The freedom of it, I guess. Being out under the open sky, watching the grass grow and the calves being born. Making something out of nothing through your own sweat and determination. Sounds like smithing," Natalie observed. "Taking raw metal and turning it into something useful. There is satisfaction in that." "I imagine there is," Kieran said. "Not many women would choose that path, though." "Not many women get the choice," Natalie countered. "After my parents died, I needed work. Mr. Hendricks needed help. It was not so much choosing as taking the opportunity that presented itself." "You like it?" Kieran asked, and the genuine curiosity in his voice made her consider the question seriously. "I do," she said finally. "I like the physicality of it, the way you can see the results of your work right there in front of you. I like understanding how things are put together, how metal behaves under heat and pressure. And I like being able to support myself, not having to depend on anyone else for my livelihood." The food arrived, steaming and fragrant, and they ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Natalie found herself sneaking glances at Kieran, noticing small things like the scar on his knuckle, the crinkles at the corners of his eyes from squinting into the sun, the way his hands moved with unconscious grace, even doing something as simple as buttering bread. "How long have you been ranching?" she asked. 5 years, Kieran said. "I saved up working cattle drives for other outfits, then bought my land from a settler who decided New Mexico territory was not for him. It has been a struggle building it up, but last year I finally turned a profit. Not much of one, but enough to know I am on the right track." "No family helping?" Natalie asked, then immediately regretted the question when she saw his expression darken slightly. "No family," he said quietly. "My folks passed when I was 17. Fever took them both within a week of each other. My sister went to live with relatives back in Missouri, but I wanted to make my own way. Came out west and never looked back." "I am sorry," Natalie said, meaning it. "It is hard losing your people." "It is," Kieran agreed. "But you build a new life, find new connections. That is what I am trying to do anyway." Their eyes met across the table, and Natalie felt something pass between them, a recognition of shared loss and shared determination. This man understood what it meant to start over, to forge something new from the ruins of what had been. The realization made her feel less alone than she had in years. They lingered over coffee, talking about everything and nothing. Kieran told her about his ranch, about the challenges of managing cattle in the high desert country, about the hired hands who worked for him, and the neighbors who helped during roundup. Natalie described the intricacies of her craft, the satisfaction of perfectly tempering a blade or fitting a difficult joint. Time seemed to stretch and bend, and she was surprised when Maria came by to refill their cups for the third time and mentioned that the lunch crowd had cleared out. "I should get back," Natalie said reluctantly. "Need to finish those hinges I was working on this morning, and your rim should be cool enough to refit by now." They walked back to the forge together, and Natalie was hyper-aware of Kieran's presence beside her, the way he shortened his stride to match hers, the comfortable silence that fell between them. At the smithy, she checked the welded rim and declared it ready. Together they fitted it back onto the wheel, and Kieran tested it with his weight, rolling the wagon back and forth. "Perfect," he pronounced. What do I owe you? Natalie calculated the cost of the horseshoe and the welding, giving him a fair price. Kieran paid without haggling, which she appreciated, and then stood there with his hat in his hands, clearly hesitating. I was wondering, he said finally, if you might like to have dinner with me tonight. There is a dance at the community hall, I heard. I know it is forward of me, and if you would rather not, I understand. But I would really like to spend more time with you, Natalie. Her first instinct was still to say no, to protect herself from the inevitable hurt when he rode away. But looking at his earnest face, the hope and nervousness in his eyes, she found she did not want to refuse. Life was short and uncertain, as she had learned all too well. Why not take a chance on something that might bring joy? Yes, she said. I would like that. The smile that broke across his face was worth any future heartache. I will pick you up at 7, he said. Where do you live? Above the forge, Natalie replied. There is a staircase around back. Kieran mounted his horse, the newly shod hoof ringing clear on the packed earth. Until tonight, then, he said, and rode off toward wherever he was staying, the wagon rattling along behind. Natalie watched him go, then turned back to her work. But she found it hard to concentrate on the hinges she was forging. Her mind kept drifting to the evening ahead, to the prospect of dancing with Kieran, of feeling his arms around her. It had been so long since she had let herself want something like this, something beyond the simple satisfaction of work well done and a roof over her head. Master Hendricks hobbled into the forge in mid-afternoon, leaning heavily on his cane. He was in his 60s, grizzled and bent from a lifetime at the anvil, but his eyes were still sharp. Here you had a visitor this morning, he said, lowering himself onto the stool by the workbench. News travels fast, Natalie replied, not looking up from the hinge she was fitting. Pretty much everything travels fast in a town this size, Hendricks said with a dry chuckle. Maria said you had lunch with some cowboy, Kieran Thornton, she thought his name was. He needed work done, Natalie said, finally meeting her mentor's eyes. And yes, we had lunch, and we are having dinner tonight if that is what you are really asking. Hendricks nodded slowly. Be careful, girl. Cowboys are restless creatures by nature, here today and gone tomorrow. I know that, Natalie said. I am not expecting anything beyond a pleasant evening. But even as she said it, she knew it was not quite true. There was something about Kieran that had gotten under her skin, past the defenses she had so carefully built. The way he had looked at her like she mattered, like she was interesting and worthwhile just as she was. The easy conversation, the shared understanding of loss and perseverance. She wanted more of that, wanted to see where it might lead, even knowing it was probably foolish. She finished the hinges and delivered them to Henderson's farm before heading back to her small apartment above the forge. The space was simple, just a bedroom and a small sitting area with a stove for cooking, but it was clean and comfortable and hers. She heated water for a bath, scrubbing away the soot and sweat of the day, washing her hair with the lavender soap she saved for special occasions. Standing in front of her small wardrobe, Natalie faced a dilemma. She owned exactly 2 dresses suitable for social occasions, both of them practical and plain. She chose the dark blue one, the color of the evening sky, and pinned her damp hair up in a simple style. No amount of effort was going to transform her into one of those delicate ladies who never lifted anything heavier than a teacup. But she could at least look presentable. Kieran arrived promptly at 7, climbing the stairs to knock on her door. He had cleaned up as well, trading his dusty trail clothes for a pressed shirt and vest, though he still wore his gun belt. Most men in Las Vegas did, the town being rough enough that going unarmed was considered foolish. His eyes widened when she opened the door and he removed his hat. You look beautiful, he said simply, and the sincerity in his voice made her flush with pleasure. "You clean up pretty well yourself," she replied, picking up her shawl. The community hall was already crowded when they arrived, filled with townsfolk eager for entertainment and social connection. A small band was playing fiddle music, lively and bright, and several couples were already spinning around the dance floor. Natalie felt Kieran's hand settle at the small of her back as he guided her through the crowd, and the simple touch sent warmth spreading through her. They danced, and Natalie was surprised to discover that Kieran was good at it, leading her through the steps with confidence. She had not danced in years, not since before her parents died, but the movements came back to her body, muscle memory taking over. They whirled and stepped, joined hands and separated, came together again. Between dances, they caught their breath at the refreshment table, drinking cool lemonade and talking with other townspeople. Several people gave Natalie curious looks, clearly surprised to see the blacksmith's apprentice dressed up and attending a social event. She had kept herself so separate for so long that her presence was noteworthy. But with Kieran beside her, his quiet strength and easy manner, she felt less self-conscious than she might have otherwise. "Having a good time?" he asked during a break in the music. "Better than I expected," Natalie admitted. "I had forgotten how nice this can be, being around people, dancing, just enjoying an evening." "You should do it more often," Kieran said. "You work too hard to never have any fun," says the man who admitted to running cattle from dawn to dusk most days, Natalie teased. "Point taken," Kieran acknowledged with a grin. "Maybe we both need to learn to enjoy life a little more." The music started again, slower this time, and Kieran drew her onto the floor. This dance required them to be closer, his arm around her waist, her hand on his shoulder. Natalie could feel the warmth of him, smell the clean scent of soap and sun-dried cotton. His eyes held hers, blue and steady and full of something that made her heart race. "I know this is moving fast," he said quietly, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "But I feel something with you, Natalie. Something I have not felt before. Like when you said earlier about forging metal, making connections that hold strong under pressure. That is what I want to forge, a connection between our hearts. I know that probably sounds foolish." Natalie's breath caught. It should have sounded foolish, too much too soon, but somehow it did not. "It is not foolish," she whispered. "I feel it too." The dance ended and they stood there for a moment, just looking at each other while other couples moved around them. Then Kieran offered his arm and they walked outside into the cool night air. The sky above Las Vegas was dense with stars, the Milky Way a river of light across the darkness. They walked slowly, neither seeming to want the evening to end. "How long are you staying in town?" Natalie asked, though she dreaded the answer. "I had planned to head back tomorrow," Kieran said, "but I am thinking I might extend my visit a few days. My foreman can handle things for a while, that is, if you would like me to stay." "I would," Natalie said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. They walked back to the forge, climbing the stairs to her apartment. At her door, Kieran took her hands in his, thumbs stroking over her knuckles. "Thank you for tonight," he said, "for taking a chance on a stranger." "Thank you for asking," Natalie replied, "for seeing me as more than just the odd woman who works in a forge." "I see so much more than that," Kieran said softly. "I see strength and skill and independence. I see someone who knows what it means to overcome hardship and keep going. I see someone beautiful, inside and out." He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, but Natalie did not want to pull away. She lifted her face to his, and their lips met in a kiss that was gentle and searching, a question and an answer all at once. Heat bloomed through her, different from the heat of the forge but just as elemental, just as transforming when they finally broke apart. Both breathing hard, Kieran rested his forehead against hers. "Can I see you tomorrow?" he asked. "Yes," Natalie said. "Come by the forge when I break for lunch." She watched him descend the stairs and disappear into the night, then went inside and leaned against the closed door, touching her fingers to her lips. The kiss had shaken something loose inside her, some carefully guarded place that she had walled off after her parents' death. Kieran was reaching that place, calling it back to life, and it was terrifying and wonderful all at once. The next morning, Natalie threw herself into work with more energy than usual, fueled by anticipation and nerves. She had several projects lined up, including a set of fireplace tools for the new schoolteacher and repairs to a broken wagon axle. Master Hendricks came down and worked beside her for a while despite his bad leg, and she was grateful for his steady presence and lack of prying questions. Kieran appeared just before noon, as promised. This time he brought lunch with him, a basket from the hotel containing sandwiches and fruit and sweet tea. They sat in the shade of the cottonwood tree beside the forge, eating and talking. Kieran told her more about his ranch, describing the land with such love that Natalie could almost see it, the rolling grasslands and distant mountains, the creek that ran through his property, the house he had built with his own hands. "I would like to show it to you," he said. "If you would be willing to come out for a visit, maybe on Sunday if you do not work that day." "I do not usually work Sundays," Natalie said, "and yes, I would like to see it." They made plans for Kieran to pick her up early Sunday morning, and then he reluctantly left to take care of some business in town. Natalie returned to her work, but her mind was already racing ahead to the weekend, imagining what his ranch would be like, what it would mean to see the place that was so important to him. The days until Sunday passed in a blur of work and stolen moments. Kieran came by the forge every day, sometimes helping with small tasks, other times just sitting and talking while Natalie worked. They had dinner together twice more, once at the hotel and once at a small cantina on the edge of town where the food was spicy and delicious, and they talked until the proprietor finally had to shoo them out so he could close. With each conversation, each shared meal, each kiss goodnight, Natalie felt herself falling deeper. It was reckless and probably foolish, but she could not seem to stop herself. Kieran was unlike anyone she had ever known, combining strength with gentleness, independence with a clear desire for connection. He listened when she talked about her work with genuine interest, asking intelligent questions, offering observations that showed he understood what she was saying. And when he talked about his own dreams and struggles, there was a vulnerability there that touched her deeply. Sunday morning dawned clear and bright, the air already warm with the promise of summer heat. Natalie wore her riding clothes, split skirts that allowed her to sit a horse properly, and braided her hair down her back. Kieran arrived with 2 horses, his sorrel gelding and a gentle mare. "Hope you do not mind riding," he said. "It is faster than taking the wagon, and I thought you might enjoy it." "I have not ridden in years," Natalie admitted, "but I used to love it." The mare was patient with her rustiness, and after a few minutes, Natalie found her seat and her confidence. They rode out of town at an easy pace, heading west into the rolling grasslands. The morning was glorious, the sky huge and blue overhead, the grass rippling in waves before the breeze. Hawks circled high above, and once they startled a small herd of pronghorn that bounded away with impossible grace. Kieran kept up a steady commentary as they rode, pointing out landmarks, telling stories about the land. His ranch lay in a valley between 2 low ridges, 15 miles from town but feeling much more remote. As they crested the final rise and Natalie got her first view of the spread below, she drew in a breath. It was beautiful. The house was small but well built, logs chinked tight and a real glass window facing south. A barn stood nearby, along with corrals and outbuildings. The creek Kieran had mentioned ran through the property, lined with cottonwoods and willows, and cattle grazed peacefully on the rich grass. Mountains rose blue in the distance, and the whole scene had a quality of rightness, of a place where a person could put down roots and thrive. "What do you think?" Kieran asked, and there was nervousness in his voice, like her opinion mattered deeply. "It is wonderful," Natalie said honestly. "You have built something really special here." They rode down to the house, where two ranch hands came out to greet them. Kieran introduced them as Carlos and Jim, and both men tipped their hats to Natalie with friendly curiosity. Kieran showed her around the place, the barn with its neat stalls and good, solid construction, the chicken coop where hens clucked and scratched, the smokehouse and root cellar. Everything was well maintained and organized, speaking to Kieran's dedication and attention to detail. Inside the house, Natalie was charmed by the simple comfort of it. The main room served as kitchen and living area, with a fireplace at one end and a good iron stove for cooking. Two doors led off to what she assumed were bedrooms. Furniture was sparse but serviceable, and everything was clean and orderly. "I know it is not much," Kieran said, "but it is home." "It is more than most people manage," Natalie said. "You should be proud of what you have accomplished here." Kieran had packed supplies for lunch, and they rode out to a spot by the creek where cottonwoods provided shade. They spread a blanket on the grass and ate the bread and cheese and cold chicken Kieran had brought, washed down with cool water from the creek. After they ate, they lay back on the blanket, looking up through the leaves at the sky beyond. "I want you to understand what I am asking," Kieran said quietly. "It is not just about me wanting to court you, though I do want that. It is about me wanting to build a life with you if you are willing. I know we have not known each other long, but I am 30 years old and I have learned to recognize something real when I find it. What I feel for you is real, Natalie. As real as this land under us, as real as the iron you forge." Natalie turned her head to look at him, seeing the intensity in his face, the hope and fear mingled there. Her heart was pounding, because this was the moment where she could either protect herself by pulling back or take the leap into the unknown. "I feel it too," she said. "But I need you to understand what you would be getting. I am not the kind of woman who can just give up her work and be satisfied keeping house and having babies. The forge is part of who I am. I need to work with my hands, need to create things." "I know that," Kieran said, reaching over to take her hand. "I am not asking you to give up anything. There is always work to be done on a ranch, iron that needs forging, tools that need mending. And Las Vegas is only 15 miles. You could still take commissions, still work with Master Hendricks. I am not trying to cage you, Natalie. I am trying to offer you a partnership, a life where we both bring our strengths and build something together." Tears pricked at Natalie's eyes, because it was more than she had ever imagined someone would offer her. Not a demand that she changed to fit some ideal, but an acceptance of who she was and an invitation to be that person within a relationship. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I want that too." Kieran pulled her close, kissing her deeply, and Natalie felt something settle into place inside her, like the perfect fitting of a joint, two pieces made to go together. They lay there in the grass for a long time, talking and dreaming, making plans. Kieran wanted to court her properly, he said, give them time to be sure. But there was no doubt in his voice or his eyes, and Natalie felt the same certainty. As the afternoon waned, they rode back to the house. Kieran showed her the second bedroom, which he had been using for storage, and suggested that if she wanted, It could become a small workshop where she could keep tools and materials. The offer touched her deeply, concrete proof that he meant what he said about her continuing her work. On the ride back to Las Vegas, Natalie felt like she was floating. The landscape that had seemed merely pleasant on the ride out was transformed now, full of possibility and promise. This could be her home, these grasslands and mountains, this valley with its clear creek and big sky. The thought should have terrified her, uprooting her life in town to move out to a ranch. But somehow it felt right, like she had been waiting for this without knowing it. Over the following weeks, their courtship unfolded with a sweetness that Natalie had never experienced before. Kieran came to town twice a week, always bringing small gifts, wildflowers or a book he thought she might like, or once, a beautifully tooled leather apron that made her tear up at the thoughtfulness. They went on picnics and long walks, attended church together on Sundays, danced at the community hall whenever there was music. Natalie visited the ranch several more times, getting to know Carlos and Jim, learning the rhythms of ranch life and helping Kieran with various projects. She forged new hinges for the barn door when the old ones failed, repaired a broken wagon tongue, made a set of hooks for the tack room. Each time she heated metal in Kieran's forge, a smaller version of the one at Master Hendrix's smithy. She could imagine doing this full-time, dividing her work between the ranch and commissions in town. Master Hendrix watched their courtship with a mixture of approval and melancholy. "You are going to leave me," he said one day, not quite a question. "Not leave you," Natalie protested. "I will still work in the forge. Kieran and I talked about it. I can come to town twice a week, take commissions, help you with the big projects." "It is not the same," Hendrix said. But then he smiled, reached out to pat her hand with his gnarled fingers. "But it is right. That boy looks at you like you hung the moon, and you look at him the same way. I am happy for you, girl. You deserve joy." 3 months after that first meeting, on a golden September afternoon, Kieran asked Natalie to marry him properly. They were at the ranch, sitting on the porch of his house as the sun set in a glory of orange and purple. He took both her hands in his and told her that every day with her made him more certain that she was what he had been searching for all along. "Marry me," he said. "Build this life with me. Forge that connection between our hearts that will last the rest of our days." "Yes," Natalie said through happy tears. "Yes, absolutely yes." They were married in October in the small church in Las Vegas with half the town in attendance. Natalie wore a new dress of cream-colored silk, the finest thing she had ever owned, and carried a bouquet of late-blooming wildflowers. Kieran wore a new suit and looked so handsome that Natalie's breath caught when she saw him waiting at the altar. Master Hendrix walked her down the aisle, since she had no father to do it, and his pride in her was evident in every slow step. The ceremony was simple but moving, traditional vows spoken with deep sincerity. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Kieran kissed her thoroughly, to the delight of the assembled crowd. The reception afterward was held at the community hall, with food and dancing and toasts to the happy couple. Maria from the hotel cried and hugged Natalie tight, whispering that she always knew that Cowboy was something special. Carlos and Jim got amusingly drunk and tried to teach complicated dance steps to anyone who would listen. As evening fell and the party showed no signs of slowing, Kieran pulled Natalie aside. "Ready to go home?" he asked softly. "Home." The word resonated through Natalie's chest, warm and right. They slipped away amid laughter and good wishes, riding back to the ranch under a sky brilliant with stars. Inside the house, Kieran lit lamps while Natalie stood in the middle of the main room, taking it in with new eyes. This was her home now, hers and Kieran's together. "Are you happy?" Kieran asked, coming to stand beside her. Happier than I have ever been, Natalie said honestly. Sometimes I still cannot quite believe this is real, that I found you. That we found each other, Kieran corrected, drawing her close. And this is just the beginning, Natalie. We have got our whole lives ahead of us. They made love that night with a tenderness and passion that left them both breathless, learning each other's bodies, discovering new ways to bring pleasure and joy. Afterward, lying wrapped in each other's arms, Natalie felt a completeness she had never imagined possible. She had spent so many years focused on mere survival, on getting through each day, that she had forgotten to hope for more. But Kieran had given her more, had given her everything. Life on the ranch proved both harder and more rewarding than Natalie had anticipated. The work was endless, the kind of labor that left you exhausted at the end of each day. But it was good work, purposeful work, and she did it alongside a man who valued her contributions and never made her feel less than equal. She did continue going to town twice a week to work in the forge with Master Hendricks, taking commissions and helping with the heavy projects. The old blacksmith's health was declining, and Natalie knew that before too long, she would need to make a decision about taking over the business full-time or letting it pass to someone else. But that was a worry for another day. For now, she threw herself into building a life with Kieran, into making the ranch thrive. She forged tools and hardware, repaired equipment, even made decorative ironwork for the house. Kieran teased her about how much better everything looked with her handiwork on it, but the pride in his voice was genuine. Their first winter together was harsh, with storms that dumped several feet of snow and temperatures that plunged below zero for days at a time. They lost a few head of cattle to the cold, despite their best efforts, and there were days when just keeping the animals fed and watered was an epic struggle. But huddled together by the fire in the evenings, Kieran's arms around her and the wind howling outside, Natalie felt safe and content in a way that had nothing to do with physical comfort and everything to do with the man beside her. Spring brought new life to the ranch. Calves were born, wobbly-legged and curious, and Natalie found herself enchanted by them. The garden she had planted behind the house began to sprout, neat rows of vegetables promising fresh food after the long winter of preserved goods. The creek ran high with snowmelt, and the grass grew lush and green. It was in late spring that Natalie realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but wanted to be certain before saying anything. When she finally told Kieran, sitting on the porch one evening and watching the sunset, he went very still. "Truly?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Truly," Natalie confirmed. "If everything goes well, we will have a baby by the beginning of winter." Kieran let out a whoop of joy that startled the chickens and pulled Natalie into his arms, lifting her clean off her feet and spinning her around. "We are going to be parents," he said, wonder in his voice. "You are going to be a mother." "And you are going to be a father," Natalie said, laughing at his exuberance. "Are you ready for that?" "I do not know if anyone is ever really ready," Kieran admitted, setting her down gently as if she were suddenly made of glass. "But I know I want this. Want to raise children with you, teach them to be strong and kind and true. Want to build a family." The pregnancy was not easy. Morning sickness plagued Natalie for the first 3 months, making it hard to work, though she pushed through it stubbornly. Kieran fussed over her constantly, trying to get her to rest more, eat more, do less. They compromised, with Natalie scaling back her heaviest work but refusing to stop entirely. The forge was part of her, and she would not give it up even for pregnancy. Master Hendricks was delighted by the news and insisted on making a cradle for the baby himself, working slowly and carefully despite his arthritic hands. It was a beautiful thing, sturdy oak with rockers that moved smoothly, and when he presented it to them, Natalie cried and hugged him tight. As summer ripened into fall and Natalie's belly swelled with new life, she and Kieran talked endlessly about the future. They discussed names, debated how to balance ranch work with raising a child, made plans for expanding the house to add more bedrooms. Carlos and Jim were excited about the prospect of a baby on the ranch, both of them promising to teach the child to ride as soon as he or she was old enough. "What if we have a whole passel of them?" Kieran mused one night, his hand resting on Natalie's rounded stomach. 6 or 7 kids running around, filling up this valley with noise and laughter. "Let us get through one first," Natalie said with a laugh. "Then we can talk about more." But secretly, she loved the image he painted. The house full of children, the ranch passed down through generations, a legacy built on love and hard work and the connection they had forged between their hearts. The baby came on a cold December night, 3 weeks earlier than expected. Natalie's labor started in the late afternoon, sharp pains that doubled her over while she was feeding the chickens. Kieran, spotting her from across the yard, ran to her side and immediately sent Jim racing to town for the midwife. The next 12 hours were the longest of Natalie's life, waves of pain crashing over her as her body worked to bring their child into the world. Kieran stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead with cool cloths, whispering encouragement. The midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Patterson, directed him with brisk efficiency, having delivered enough babies to know that a supportive husband could make all the difference. Finally, as dawn was breaking over the eastern hills, their son was born. He came into the world screaming his displeasure at the cold and the light, tiny fists waving, and Natalie laughed and cried as Mrs. Patterson placed him on her chest. "A boy," Kieran breathed, his voice thick with tears. "We have a son." They named him Kieran Thornton, and he was perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, a shock of dark hair like his mother's, and eyes that would probably turn blue like his father's. Kieran held him with such tenderness, such wonder, that Natalie fell in love with him all over again. The first months of parenthood were exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. Kellen was a demanding baby, waking every few hours to feed, crying with the powerful lungs of a future cattle rancher. But he was also sweet, with a ready smile and a curious gaze that seemed to take in everything. Natalie learned to work in shorter bursts, between feedings and naps, and discovered a whole new well of determination she had not known she possessed. Kieran was a wonderful father, patient and gentle, changing diapers without complaint, walking the floor with Kellen when he was fussy, singing silly songs that made their son gurgle with laughter. Watching him with their child, Natalie felt her heart swell with so much love she thought it might burst. As winter gave way to spring, and Kellen grew from infant to active, curious baby, life on the ranch settled into new rhythms. They took turns with the night feedings, worked together during the day, stole moments of intimacy whenever they could. It was not always easy, balancing work and parenthood and their relationship, but they managed it through communication and compromise and deep love. Master Hendricks died that spring, peacefully in his sleep. Natalie mourned him deeply, grateful that he had lived long enough to meet Kellen, to hold the baby and tell stories about teaching Natalie her craft. The smithy in town passed to Natalie, as Hendricks had arranged in his will, and she found herself at a crossroads. She could not manage both the town forge and the ranch work, not with a baby. In the end, she sold the business to a young blacksmith newly arrived from Colorado, a skilled craftsman who would serve the town well. But she kept her mentor's anvil and some of his best tools, hauling them out to the ranch and setting up a proper workshop in one of the outbuildings. She would continue her craft, but on her own terms, taking commissions when they interested her and focusing the rest of her energy on her family. The ranch prospered. Kieran's careful management and Natalie's practical skills combined to make the operation more efficient and profitable. They expanded their herd gradually, bought more land when it became available, hired an additional hand to help Carlos and Jim. They were not rich by any means, but they were comfortable, able to provide for their son and plan for the future. When Kellen was 2, Natalie became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, her body knowing what to do. Their daughter was born on a warm July evening, coming quickly and with far less drama than her brother. They named her Catherine Marie, and she had Kieran's blue eyes and a calm temperament that was a delightful contrast to her energetic brother. Life with 2 children was chaotic and wonderful. Kellen was fascinated by his baby sister, always wanting to help care for her, though his help often consisted of bringing her random objects like stones or chicken feathers. Kieran built an addition onto the house, 2 more bedrooms and a larger kitchen, and Natalie forged the hardware for all the doors and windows, decorative pieces that turned the simple ranch house into something special. The years rolled past, full of work and laughter, challenges and triumphs. Kellen grew into a sturdy boy who loved the ranch and everything about it, trailing after his father to learn about cattle and horses and land management. Catherine was quieter but just as curious, spending hours in Natalie's workshop watching her mother work the forge, asking endless questions about metal and heat and transformation. When Kellen was 6 and Catherine 4, Natalie found herself pregnant once more. This third child, another boy they named Kenneth, was a surprise but a welcome one. He came into the world with a lusty cry and a stubborn streak that kept them all on their toes. Kieran joked that they were building their own cattle crew, and indeed, all 3 children showed early signs of being as devoted to the ranch as their parents. As the children grew, Natalie taught them all her craft, just as Master Hendricks had taught her. Kellen showed the most aptitude, his hands strong and sure at the anvil, even as a young boy. Catherine preferred the more decorative aspects, creating intricate designs that impressed everyone who saw them. Kenneth was still too young to do more than pump the bellows, but he watched everything with keen attention, already learning. The ranch became known throughout the territory for its quality cattle and fine ironwork, the Thornton name synonymous with honest dealing and excellent craftsmanship. Kieran and Natalie built friendships with neighboring ranchers, helped their community during hard times, raised their children to value integrity and hard work. There were hard years, too. A drought in the summer, Kellen turned 10 that tested them all, forcing them to make difficult decisions about the herd. A winter storm that killed several cattle and damaged the barn. The occasional conflicts with rustlers or predators. But they faced it all together, and somehow that made even the hardest times bearable. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Kieran surprised Natalie with a gift that made her cry. It was a sign for the gate of their ranch, wrought iron scrollwork spelling out Thornton Ranch with incredible artistry. "I made it myself," Kieran said, holding her close as they admired it together. "You taught me well, my love. I wanted to create something that would show everyone who passed by what we have built here, not just a ranch but a home, a family, a legacy." "It is beautiful," Natalie said, running her fingers over the smooth metal. "You did forge it perfectly." "I learned from the best," Kieran said. "And I am not talking about the metalwork. I am talking about forging a life together, about the connection between our hearts. You taught me what that means, Natalie. You showed me that love is not just a feeling but a choice you make every day, a commitment you honor with your actions." Standing there in the golden afternoon light, their children playing nearby, The ranch spread out before them in all its hard-won beauty. Natalie reflected on how far they had come. From that first meeting in the forge, Kieran looking for help with a broken wagon rim and finding something so much more. From two lonely people who had lost their families and learned to survive alone to this, a partnership that had created new life, new hope, new possibilities. "I love you," she said, looking up into his eyes. "More now than even on the day we married. Because I know you now, know your strength and your gentleness, your dedication and your dreams. You are my home, Kieran, more than this ranch or this valley or even this territory. You are where I belong." "And you are mine," Kieran replied, kissing her softly. "My partner, my love, the forge that keeps my heart warm." The years continued to unfold, bringing changes and challenges, joys and sorrows. They celebrated as their children grew and thrived as the ranch expanded and prospered. They mourned when Carlos died peacefully in his sleep, having worked for them faithfully for 20 years. They rejoiced when Kellen, at 20, married a local girl named Emma, a rancher's daughter with a good head for business and a kind heart. Natalie and Kieran became grandparents for the first time when Kellen and Emma's son was born, a moment that made them both feel the weight of years and the blessing of continuity. Their grandson, named Benjamin after Natalie's mentor, had his grandfather's blue eyes and his great-great-uncle's tendency to grab at everything within reach. Catherine, at 18, surprised them all by announcing her intention to go east to study art. The decorative ironwork she had been creating had caught the attention of a dealer passing through, and he suggested she could develop her talents further with formal training. It was hard to let her go, but Natalie and Kieran supported her dreams the way they had always supported each other's. Kenneth, at 16, was already proving himself an capable ranch manager, working alongside his father and older brother with the easy competence of someone born to the work. He talked about expanding their operations, about breeding programs and new techniques, and Kieran listened with pride and occasional bemusement at how much the world was changing. On a warm summer evening, 30 years after that first meeting in the forge, Natalie and Kieran sat together on their porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Their hands were clasped, fingers intertwined, and they did not need words to communicate. They had built a language of glances and touches over 3 decades, could read each other as easily as Natalie could read the color of heated metal. "Do you ever regret it?" Kieran asked suddenly. "Giving up the forge in town, the independence you had before we met?" Natalie turned to look at him, seeing the gray in his hair, the lines around his eyes, the weathering that 3 decades of ranch life had brought. He was still handsome to her, still the man who had walked into the smithy all those years ago and changed her life forever. "Never," she said firmly. "Not for one single moment. I gave up nothing, Kieran. I gained everything. I have my forge, my work. I have this ranch, this land. I have children and grandchildren. And most of all, I have you. I have the connection we forged between our hearts, and it has held strong through everything. That is worth more than any amount of independence." "I feel the same," Kieran said softly. "Before you, I was just surviving, making my way, building a ranch, but without any real purpose beyond the next season, the next year. You gave me purpose, Natalie. You gave me a reason to build something that would last beyond my own lifetime. You gave me love." They sat in comfortable silence, watching as the sun sank below the horizon and the first stars emerged in the darkening sky. From inside the house came the sounds of family, Kellen and Emma helping put young Benjamin to bed, Kenneth arguing good-naturedly with his father about something ranch-related. The sounds of life, of continuity, of love. "Remember that first day," Natalie mused. You needed a horseshoe and a wagon rim repaired. I was covered in soot and probably looked like something the wind blew in. You looked beautiful, Kieran said. Strong and capable and unlike anyone I had ever met. I knew right then that you were special. You told me you wanted to forge a connection between our hearts, Natalie said. At the dance, remember, I thought it was the most romantic thing anyone had ever said to me. It was the truth, Kieran replied. And I think we did forge that connection, do you not? Heated our hearts in the fire of life and hammered them into a bond that nothing can break. Yes, Natalie agreed, leaning her head against his shoulder. We forged something strong and true, and it will last, Kieran. Long after we are gone, our children and grandchildren will carry it forward. The love we built here, the life we created together, that is our real legacy. As the years continued, they grew old together with grace and gratitude. Kieran's hair turned completely white, and Natalie's hands grew gnarled with arthritis, making it harder to work the forge. But they adapted, finding new ways to contribute, new ways to be useful. They were the heart of a sprawling family now, grandparents many times over, the wise elders who had built something from nothing. Catherine returned from the East with a husband, a painter she had met at school, and together they set up a studio on the ranch, creating beautiful things that brought joy and beauty into the world. Kenneth married and brought his wife to live on the ranch, expanding the house yet again to accommodate the growing family. Kellen took over the day-to-day management of the cattle operation, though Kieran still rode out with him often, unable to completely give up the work that had defined so much of his life. On their 50th wedding anniversary, the family threw a huge celebration. Children and grandchildren came from near and far. Friends and neighbors filled the ranch, and the party lasted from afternoon until well past midnight. Natalie and Kieran sat like royalty at the center of it all, holding hands and smiling at the life they had built. 50 years, Kieran marveled as they danced slowly to fiddle music, moving carefully on old bones but still finding the rhythm. Half a century since I walked into that forge and found my heart's desire. Best decision you ever made, Natalie teased, though her eyes were wet with happy tears. Best decision we both made, Kieran corrected. To take a chance on love, to forge that connection, to build this life together. They grew older still, eventually needing to be cared for rather than doing the caring, but they faced it together as they had faced everything. When Kieran's heart began to fail, when the doctors said there was nothing more to be done, Natalie insisted on caring for him at home, in the house they had built together, surrounded by the family they had created. On a quiet spring morning, 53 years after their wedding, Kieran passed away peacefully with Natalie holding his hand. His last words were to tell her he loved her, that she had made his life complete, that he would wait for her on the other side. Natalie held him as his breathing slowed and stopped, feeling like half of her soul had been torn away, but grateful beyond measure for the life they had shared. She lived another 5 years without him, surrounded by loving children and grandchildren, still working in her forge when her hands allowed, still finding joy in the land, and the life Kieran had introduced her to all those years ago. But everyone could see that part of her had gone with her husband, that she was waiting patiently to be reunited with her other half. When Natalie died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 84, the entire community mourned. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives had been touched by her and Kieran, whose homes held ironwork she had forged, whose respect they had earned through integrity and kindness. They buried her next to Kieran in the small cemetery on the ranch, under a spreading cottonwood tree with a view of the mountains they had both loved. The iron gate at the entrance to the cemetery was adorned with a plaque that Kellen had commissioned, beautiful scrollwork surrounding simple words. Here lie Kieran and Natalie Thornton, who forged a connection that death itself could not break. Together always. The ranch continued, passed down through the generations, each one adding their own contributions while honoring the foundation that Kieran and Natalie had built. The forge was maintained, tools kept oiled and ready, a shrine to the woman who had proven that strength and femininity were not opposites, that a woman could swing a hammer and create beautiful things and still be soft and loving and maternal. Stories were told and retold, becoming family legend. The story of how Kieran walked into a forge looking for a horseshoe and found his wife. How Natalie took a chance on a cowboy despite all her defenses. How they built a life together based on mutual respect and deep love, forging not just metal but a family, a legacy, a love that transcended time itself. The ironwork sign that Kieran had made still hung at the ranch entrance, the metal worn smooth by decades of weather but still strong, still beautiful. Thornton Ranch, it proclaimed to all who passed, but those who knew the full story understood it meant so much more. It was a testament to what two people could build together when they were willing to be vulnerable, to trust, to forge a connection between their hearts and hold firm to it through all of life's challenges. In the end, Kieran and Natalie's story was one of hope and transformation, of two lonely people who found each other and created something wonderful. They proved that love could thrive even in the harsh environment of the frontier, that a woman could be both strong and tender, that a man could be both tough and gentle. They showed their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren what real partnership looked like, what it meant to honor and support and cherish another person through all the seasons of life. Their story became part of the land itself, woven into the soil of the valley, carried on the wind that rustled through the grass, reflected in the clear water of the creek that still ran through the property. And though they were gone, their love remained, as permanent and enduring as the iron Natalie had forged, a connection that would never break, a legacy that would never fade, a love story for the ages.